Good morning, Sandy. How are you today?
I am most excellent.
Eh, Really?
Yeah, I am.
Well, I find that a little strange. But
Why?
why would you say you're most excellent today?
The sun is shining. I'm with you and Don.
Oh,
Aw,
It's always good to see our producer Don in the studio.
well, I know that you're coming back off of 3 weeks of a wonderful vacation, but I think I'm a little melancholy because we have one daughter about to embark back to Africa and another daughter that's headed off to school, which means how many people are going to be left in our big old house?
You and me, kid.
You and me, the dog, and the cat.
All right, you just took me down. I
Well,
was having a good day.
well,
Thanks for the
anyway, Nell,
reminders.
Nell, that's where we are today. How are you doing? And would you like to introduce yourself?
sure. I'm doing well today.
Mm-hmm.
I'm with Sandy. I'm having a good morning so far. The sun is out. It's summertime. It's Friday. All
Mm-hmm.
is well.
So,
Um,
so if you were on like a news show or one of those conferences, how would you introduce yourself?
a news show.
You,
Oh
with
God.
name and what you do at the current moment.
So my name is Nell Hurley,
Mm-hmm.
and I have a small business called Hurley Health.
Mm-hmm.
Hurley Health is a recovery support organization that combines fitness with recovery support.
Mm-hmm.
My two passions
There you go.
have melded together. And yeah, that's what I'm doing. I started Hurley Health about a year and a half ago during the pandemic, which was challenging, but I've had lots of experiences in the recovery community, which we can talk about. But I feel like everything has been kind of leading me to this
Mhm.
moment where I have my own business and I'm working with people who are either in recovery or sober curious,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm sort of infusing fitness and movement into that process of taking a look at substance use or um, recovering from substance use challenges.
It's interesting, you mentioned how if you look back, everything lined up to what you're doing today. And I think about how much time as a young person you spend trying to map out your career journey and line things up just perfectly. And my experience is that I can only see the path in the rearview mirror, that it prepared me for where I am, but nothing was on the plan. It just happened, or the door opened, or the window opened, or
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. I went for a walk with a friend of mine last night, and we were talking about we had just like this big conversation about life and career and just sort of big stuff, parenting, all of it. And we were talking about just that. I was actually saying to her, like, I wish that it hadn't taken me so long to kind of figure it out. But
Mm-hmm.
it took what it took. And I had all these different experiences that really did lead me to where I am today. And I don't regret any of it. I've had a very, I know very few people who have sort of a straight line path
Mhm.
in their career. I have one friend who is an architect, and he knew when he was in sixth grade that he wanted to be an architect. And that's what he did. But he is the exception
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
to the rule.
I've never had a plan,
Correct.
but here I am at CCAR now for 23 plus years. So
Amazing.
that wasn't part of the plan. It just
Yeah.
unfolded. But I did have about 33 jobs before I ever
Right.
landed at
He
CCAR.
front loaded.
Yeah, I guess I front loaded. I don't know. Um, here's what's your earliest childhood memory?
Oh gosh. I feel like some of my what I think of as my earliest childhood memories aren't even really memories, but they've come to me through photographs and
Mm,
through
Mm,
stories that
yeah.
my family has told over the years. So I'm not sure. I do have a very distinct memory. This isn't even really all that early. I was probably 5 or 6 years old, but I have a memory of my dad teaching me how to ride a bike.
Ah.
And that is when I think of like early childhood experiences, that is something that I remember so clearly. I remember and there's also pictures of it. So maybe that is partly informing my memory, but I feel like I remember what I was wearing. I remember, the feeling of summertime and being with my dad. And, it was a big milestone to learn how to ride a bike. I remember my haircut, I guess from the photographs, but yeah.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota, where I live today, where I've spent most of my life. I've had a few excursions to other places. I went to college in Washington State. I lived abroad for a short time after college. But I've spent most of my life here in St. Paul.
Do you have siblings?
I have two brothers. Yeah, one's in Minneapolis. One is in San Francisco, California, where he's been for 25 years or so. But yes, I come from a big Irish Catholic family that is from St. Paul. So I have tons of cousins and second cousins, and we all grew up together and in a different time, right? In the 70s and 80s. I was talking about this with my husband last night, actually, not to sound like, an old crotchety person, but just how much the world has changed since we were kids. He's 10 years older than me, but still, I grew up before the internet, before phones. And I actually live in the same neighborhood that I grew up in. So I have a lot of memories of running around the neighborhood, playing outside. We entertained ourselves and came in when the streetlights came on.
So just one clarification for our audience that might be listening on the podcast. Before cell phones.
Oh, before cell phones. Yes. Not before.
Telephones.
Yes. Dial phones. But we did have a phone that was attached to our kitchen wall. It wasn't even a push button phone. It was a rotary phone, and it had a long cord, and we would talk on the phone
we had a party line so that sometimes there was somebody else on the phone and you had to wait till they were done.
Oh.
Yeah.
You are that much older than me. So.
Well, I did everything exactly the same way Nell did growing up. That was just the way we grew up. It was a different time.
Yeah.
What were you like as a kid?
I was kind of a cute kid.
I believe it.
Yeah. I had a lot of friends. I laughed a lot as a kid, especially in middle school. I was always getting in trouble for laughing my head off with Michelle McLaughlin in school. I was drawn to people, I think, as a kid. And I think that as I've gotten older, I've become, I don't know if your personality can really change. You know how you take those tests that tell you whether you're an introvert or an extrovert? Right. I think I truly was extroverted as a kid, and as a young person, I was very sort of outwardly motivated towards people. And as I've gotten older, even before the pandemic, I have become more introverted and more sort of in need of recharging my batteries by being alone and having downtime, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I was very social as a kid. I'll say that. Yeah.
What were your passions, your big interests?
Well, when I was in 8th grade, I started going to a YMCA camp in Minnesota, in northern Minnesota, called Camp Widgewagon. Mm-hmm. And this camp was based in Ely, Minnesota, which is right on the edge of the Boundary Waters. And I actually grew up even before that going to kind of a sister camp to Widgie called Camp du Nord, which was also a YMCA camp, but it was a family camp. And I absolutely lived for camp.
Mm.
When I went to camp, I would canoe and paddle in the boundary waters, portaging and paddling and camping. And it was my absolute sort of lifesaver and refuge. I started using in high school, and when I would go to camp in the summertime, that was my it's hard to even describe. It was like a spiritual reprieve from my life at home, my life in St. Paul, which wasn't, the using at that point wasn't, the using itself wasn't terrible. I was trying to escape my own, you know, discomfort. There's my dog saying.
Yes.
Anyway, my real passion was the boundary waters and being on the water, being in a canoe and portaging and hiking and mosquitoes.
Yeah, I visited Ely when I was in St. Paul with Joe Camp, and he had a cabin up there, and I had a spiritual experience in that area. It was just an amazingly beautiful, peaceful place. Do you go up there still?
I do, not as much as I would like to, but I do go. I have a dear friend who bought a piece of land in Ely just a few years ago, and I helped her build sort of a tiny little cabin.
Oh, wow.
On the property. She is an amazing person. She's this little 5'1" person, and she can build anything. I mean, anything. She can build a house. She can build a canoe. And she's done it all. And so I just show up, and she tells me where to make cuts, with a saw, or where to drill holes, and it's been really fun being up on her land with her and just being in that part of the state.
That sounds good. So you're in high school, and you said you were using to escape. What do you think you were trying to escape from? Expand on that a little bit.
My parents got divorced when I was 6 years old. This was 1976. I'm 53 now. I was born in 1969. I'll just save you from having to do the math. So when I was 6, almost 7 years old, my parents got divorced. And that was really, I wouldn't have used the word trauma or traumatic until maybe a few years ago, when I learned more about trauma, sort of capital T trauma. Lower, I always thought of trauma as like being in Afghanistan in combat or something, but it was it was very hard as a little kid to go through, for our whole family went through that. And I think the years following the divorce, feeling with this acute feeling of sort of shame and awkwardness. And even though, there was part of me that was like this really like sort of outgoing, cute, like fun loving little kid, I also had a very strong feeling of like, what's going on here? And this doesn't seem right. And who knows? It's hard to sort of pinpoint like why or where. I think there's all kinds of reasons why I sort of developed the way that I did in feeling less than, uncomfortable, restless, irritable, and discontent, even as a little kid. And when I was about 15, I drank alcohol for the first time. And and actually my first experience with alcohol was not, sometimes in the rooms of recovery, you hear people describe that experience as like this, like white light experience of like, this is it, this is the answer. And I actually had a very a really scary experience the first time I drank alcohol. I drank a whole bottle of slow gin when I
Ugh.
was 15 years old, the first time I drank, because I just didn't know. I didn't know what I was doing. And I got alcohol poisoning. It was terrible. And, scared the bejesus out of my parents. And I just was so ashamed of what I'd done. And I didn't go back to alcohol for uh, quite a long time. But shortly after that, I discovered marijuana. And that was that was it for me. That was my answer. And, that's what I did for as much as I could over the next 4 years. I went to treatment when I was 19 years old.
Wow.
I had 2 treatments in 1 year when I was 19. I, I don't know what to say about those experiences.
How did they come to be, though? Like, how was that your choice? Were people around you influencing you to go?
Yeah, a couple of things played into it. One was that, so I mentioned that my parents got divorced in 1976, and it was a very, I came from a huge family. I have all these cousins, Catholic, Irish Catholic family. 1976, we didn't know a single other family that had divorced parents. And that in itself had a big impact on me. I think nowadays, unfortunately, divorce is so common. It's not, kids don't necessarily feel like I'm the only one.
Right.
But so 1976 was when the divorce happened. And then in about 1978, so when I was about 8 or 9 years old, my mom went through treatment for marijuana use. And about 6 months after that, my dad went through treatment. So I had 2 experiences as a young girl, 8, 9 years old, going to a family program. And I remember, I have this distinct memory of when my dad was in treatment, being in the family program. I mean, I can remember the counselor. This was in the 70s. I know beards are very in again, but he had the 70s beard, and we were in a room that had yellow walls and yellow chairs. I was sucking my thumb, which is kind of weird for an 8-year-old, but I remember it completely. And I remember that counselor saying this. I don't remember the exact words that he used, but the message was, this is a family disease. I don't know if he used the word disease or illness, but the message got through to me that, like, this can be in your genetics, in your genes. And the way that I interpreted that as a little kid was, this thing is going to get me too. And I didn't hang on to that sort of premonition, but I mean, I think kind of forgot about it and went on and became a, happy-go-lucky middle schooler, and, then started using in high school. But as soon as I started using, that thought popped up of, it felt to me from the get-go like my using was different, and I felt powerless. It felt out of control. Even though I was just, quote unquote, using marijuana, it was like, oh man, this is, I'm on a ride. Like, you better hang on here. So I had these early experiences with members of my family, close members of my family, my parents being in recovery, and other members of my extended family also being in recovery. I remember going to meetings, like big open meetings with my mom and dad. It wasn't something that I didn't know about. I was aware of both the problem and the solution, my whole childhood, it felt like. So when I was 19, or when I was 18, I graduated from high school. I went to a private Catholic all girls school. All my friends went off to college, and I was just, using every day. And I just couldn't get it together enough to like be on the same track that my peers were on. So they all went off to college. I took a job at a bank downtown St. Paul in a mail room, where on my first day of work, I worked a 3 to 11 shift. So downtown St. Paul would essentially, like, they would roll up the sidewalks at 4 o'clock. And on my first day of work, my supervisor offered me cocaine. So I worked that job. We would load up this big copy machine in the mailroom that would run for hours and hours. Again, this was a different time. This was before people could just, send things via email, or we would make copies, and then we would go across the street to a bar. Even though I was under 21, I had a fake ID, and we would drink. And that was my life for a year. And I just knew that I was missing out on, it was like, what am I doing? But I had the same experience day after day after day of going into the mailroom every day, telling myself, I'm not going to drink today. I'm not going to do cocaine. I'm not going to keep doing this. And, by 6 p.m., I would be doing the same thing. So I essentially sort of checked myself in to treatment. I told my mom what was going on, and I had insurance through the bank, and I was enrolled in an outpatient treatment program at St. Joseph's Hospital in downtown St. Paul. I went to treatment, didn't love it, was very much, I felt like my life was over if I was going to have to quit using, because I was so young, and but I didn't know what else to do. I was using by the time I was in, back then they called it aftercare, which was like the weekly kind of check-in meeting. And then about 6 months later, I went through another outpatient program. And nothing, I can't even remember how I got there. Nothing big happened. I just, I think I thought, well, maybe I'll try again.
Yeah.
And so I got into another outpatient program, and that program I didn't even finish. I remember I was living with my mom at the time. I remember saying to my mom, please I hate going there. I just feel so out of place. And she said, you don't have to go, but you have to go to meetings. So I started going to AA meetings at age 19, and this was in 1989. I actually found young people. I found, this was long before YPR or, any of these, mini PAW, Minnesota Young People in AA, I don't think existed, but there were some young people around. And again, I was outgoing and extroverted, and I liked having friends. And that was my recovery. That was my pathway, was being social and having friends. And I played recovery softball or on the, softball league on Friday nights. And I found a whole community, and that was the beginning for me. That was, kind of, I don't know. I never had a sponsor. Like, I went to meetings. I don't know that I ever worked any steps or anything, but I was in it. I was in the community, and I was connected to people. And it was amazing. I didn't know that I could do anything without smoking weed.
Mm-hmm.
So you've been in recovery since?
No. There's more to the story. So.
I was like, oh, wow.
Yeah. So I had a really good few years. I stayed sober for about 3 years. So from 19 to about 22. And I lived at home in St. Paul. I lived with my parents ended up getting back together. That's a whole nother.
I was wondering.
Yeah. But many years later, but I lived at home, and I worked at a coffee shop in St. Paul, this like really great coffee shop that was always crowded, and there was music. And again, this was in 1989, 1990. There was no Starbucks.
Right.
I mean, I'm dating myself,
Yeah.
actually dating myself by giving you the date, but
Yeah.
um, it was such a fun job. And I enrolled in in school at the community college in Minneapolis Community College, and I loved it. It was so fun for me to be able to be a student and not be high, and to rediscover how much I loved learning, because I loved school when I was in middle school and before I started using in high school. But I lost that while I was in high school. While I was using, I was really rebellious. I was cutting class and barely getting by. And so to rediscover my love of learning, and I
Do,
took every.
do you know that's how I remember you or always think of you? Because we're skipping ahead many years, but when you started working with the Minnesota Recovery Connection and you and I connected, you were so passionate about learning. You wanted to know everything.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
still like that. I think of myself as, remember that TV show Cheers? Again, dating myself,
Yeah.
but Diane on Cheers, she was
Hmm.
like, had like 10 master's degrees in
Hmm.
anthropology and
Yeah.
social work and all. Yes. If I could just, be in school for the rest of my life, I would do it.
Yeah.
But,
We
no
kind of
exception.
are. We kind of are, aren't we?
Yes, we kind of are.
Hmm.
Um, but so I rediscovered my love of learning. I took all the classes I could at Minneapolis Community College. I got my 2-year degree, and that whole time I was sober and had friends, and my life just exploded. It just got so much bigger than it was when I was working in that mailroom, where all
Hmm.
I did was drink and work in the mailroom. Uh, so after taking all the classes that I could at the community college, I wanted to transfer to a 4-year school. So I transferred to Western Washington University in Bellingham, Washington. And my parents bought me a little used Honda Civic, and I drove it from St. Paul to Bellingham. And I remember driving into Bellingham. It's this beautiful, kind of a small college town, 50,000 people, and it's right on the Puget Sound, and there's snow-capped mountains and just the trees. And I was coming in on this sort of windy road, and I just was overcome with this like euphoric feeling of a fresh start. Like,
Hmm.
you know, I've got this experience ahead of me. I'm starting college, I'm going away to college. And uh, I thought, I'm just going to start over. I don't know that this was really a conscious thought, but it was in there somewhere where I thought, I don't want to be the weird one who's like been to treatment or has been, who is sober. I was 21 or 22 years old, and I just wanted to have like a quote unquote normal college experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, I'm not going to share that part of myself. And again, it wasn't really a conscious thought, but that's what I did. So I went to school in Bellingham. I absolutely loved it. I did a semester in Greece while I was there. I loved school so much that my drinking actually didn't interfere with my schoolwork, because I would prefer to read and write papers than use. Although I did, I would like go to bars on weekends or parties, and but it didn't. I kind of managed it for a couple of years, but then, as you can probably predict, things started to unravel. I graduated. I came back to Minnesota, and I felt I think being back in my hometown where I got sober, I felt like I didn't have a place. And it felt very much for the next couple of years. I drank for 5 years, from 22 to 27. And I spent almost all of my mental energy during that, at least the last 3-year period, just trying to manage my drinking. And I kind of sort of did, like, maybe like 8 out of every 10 times I drank, it was kind of okay. But I couldn't predict when was the 1 or 2 times where it would, go totally off the rails and I'd be trying to get cocaine. And, I was back to like, oh my God, this is not healthy. This is not good. This is not good. So I started going back to meetings, and I think I always thought in the back of my head, like, well, if things ever get bad enough, I'll just go back to meetings and I'll be fine. Well, that's not the way it worked for me. I started going back to meetings, and it didn't click. I would go to a meeting every Wednesday night, and then I would drink on the weekend, and then I would go back to the meeting and then drink. Maybe I would put 2 weeks together, but I was just really in and out for about a year. And then I got a DUI, and I kept, sort of in and out. My very last drink was the last time I used anything was alcohol. I had 1 glass of wine on December 27th, 1997. And I was still trying to like prove to myself and to the world, but mostly to myself, like, see, I can have 1 glass of wine. This, it's cool. I'm fine. Look at me. I'm such a in control grown up. But there was something, like, how it is, you can't explain it. Like, there was some part of me that just went, that's it. You're done. Who cares if you can have 1? Sometimes there are those times when you can't have 1, or 2 or 3 or 4. Who knows what is going to happen? So I don't know how. All I know is that I went to the same meeting on Wednesday nights at 6:00 on the back porch of the Uptown AA house every Wednesday night for 5 years. And I took my last drink somewhere in there, and I've, kind of never looked back.
Right.
There's a few things in what you shared. So one of them is that I work with students in recovery at the University of Connecticut, and I have this experience of students coming in, meeting with me and saying they don't want anybody to know. They want to live in a traditional dorm. They want to give this a go. And I think your story is not unusual with how that turns out. The other thing that you kind of sparked in me, you and Phil, was Phil asked you if you remained in recovery all these years, and you said no, you hadn't. And so one of the conversations I've been having with a lot of different folks recently is recovery equivalent to sobriety. So when you think about that time that you returned to use, were you still leveraging recovery tools and practices, or had you really just moved away from those things in your life?
That's a good question. And the whole, issue of sort of what is recovery is very compelling. I think for the first couple of years, Sandy, I remained pretty healthy. I was using some, but I had real purpose by being in school. I am a lifelong learner. I thrive in that in academic environments. And I felt pretty whole and healthy. But so that was for about the first 2 years during this 5-year period of a return to use. But then I started to get, I graduated from college, and I started to kind of fall apart a little bit. And I would say that I wasn't practicing all that many recovery tools.
Yeah. Or treating your disease, right? So
Right.
I've been rewiring my brain because sobriety is still at the core of my own recovery, but I've been rewiring my brain as I think of young adults and think of that decision that you talked about. Like, okay, I know what this is about. Am I going to make this decision to never use for the rest of my life? And sometimes the shame that comes along with return to use that keep young people, particularly from, well, any age, from returning to treating their disease.
Mm-hmm.
But that's enough on that. I'll let.
No, well, I just think for me it was, and I do this. I have a pattern is I go really hard at something until something gives way. And that's what I did with my drinking, and something gave, got in a lot of trouble, put that down and said, well, obviously I can't do that. Let me try cocaine. That'll probably work a little better. And I went really hard on that until that blew up, and I put that aside. And the only thing that's really sustained me is this pathway of recovery that I've been on now since 1987. That's really always fresh, always interesting. You can always learn more when you're on this, what I think is a spiritual journey towards self-awareness, which is just more and more, I learn more and more about myself all the time.
Yeah.
So I know that you've pursued recovery and you got involved with the recovery movement. So talk a little bit about how you ended up in part of this recovery movement and all of that. And
well, that happened by accident.
Well, so did mine too.
A happy accident.
Is it an accident, really?
I call them a divine appointment.
All right.
So in 2009,
You're amazing with dates, by the way. I don't know how you remember all those things, but you got the timeline in your head. I can't remember the dates. Sandy, when did we get married? No, just kidding.
What's your anniversary date? Yes. Yeah. Do you know Sandy's birthday? Hopefully.
Most days.
So 2008, I was working for a software company when the recession hit. I was laid off. And so I was freelancing for about, 9 months or so. I was kind of hustling, freelance writing, etc., just trying to pay the bills. And someone told me, and I was looking for a full-time job. Someone told me about a job that they had heard about. It was working for a recovery community organization in St. Paul. And at that time, I had been sober, abstinent, in recovery for 12 years and was very, rooted in the recovery community here in St. Paul, where I live. I had never heard of an RCO, or recovery community organization. And I was like, what's that? That, I don't know, that sounds kind of cool. So I went to check it out. I sent my resume. I got an interview. I went to the interview. Joe Camp, who started Minnesota Recovery Connection, was the kind of the main guy there. And I was interviewed by the board of directors. I was so green. I didn't know anything about recovery advocacy. I'd never heard of a recovery coach. I didn't know what a recovery community organization was. I was a blank slate. But I think that what they liked about me was that I was rooted in recovery. And I also had a business background. So going back to my love of school and my love of learning, by this time I was working on my second master's degree. So I got one master's degree in 2000 in English literature, which is just my passion, literature and books. And then I went back to school in 2009. I went to business school, and got a master's in nonprofit management. So I think that the board of Minnesota Recovery Connection thought, well, here's someone who has business experience and is in recovery. So they hired me as the executive director, the first employee of Minnesota Recovery Connection. And I tell people that on my first day of work at MRC, I had one of those yellow legal pads, like a yellow pad of paper and a pen, and $542,000 to build. They had gotten the money from the state of Minnesota. They had a work plan, and but they were like, all right, we got funded. Let's hire someone and let them build it. And that's exactly what they just like handed me a work plan, $542,000 for 18 months of operation. They said, build this thing. And that is what I did. And it was amazing. I've never worked so much or so hard in my life as I did for those. I was only there for 5 years. But the very first thing I did when I got that job was to come to Connecticut. I mean, about the first thing I did. I think, I had been there, about a month, and I came out to see you, Phil, and shadowed your staff. And I was just, it was like getting a PhD in recovery community organization, just like this total immersion into what does it look like? How does it work? And I was just a sponge. And I spent time with you. You were a huge mentor to me. Then I went to Washington, D.C. I spent time with Pat Taylor at Faces and Voices of Recovery. I spent time with Tom Hill. Later, I met Neil Campbell, and I went to Atlanta, spent a week with her. I mean, and then I kind of took it back to Minnesota, and we Minnesotified it.
You did.
And we built an incredible recovery community organization. And now there are 14 RCOs in Minnesota.
Wow.
Today, 12 years later. So it's really, really grown. Minnesota Recovery Connection is still in operation. It's much, much bigger than it was then.
Do they have an area, or do they oversee all the RCOs?
They do not oversee all the RCOs. They're trying to create sort of a MARCO, so a Minnesota Association of Recovery Community Organizations. So sort of all the RCOs are separate, but they're working on trying to make a more connected network so that people can work together more. I remember even back then saying, like, we should do this the way Connecticut is doing it. And DHS our Department of Human Services just didn't go for it. And everything was funded by the state at that time. So, not surprisingly, it developed in this way where there's, all these different RCOs popped up across the state, and they all have different founders, different 501c3s, different boards, and they're competing with each other.
Right.
In some ways, it's really sort of heartbreaking to see, but maybe it'll come together.
Well, that's always been the age-old discussion, right? Do you have a statewide RCO? And I've always said that Connecticut is a little different because it's so small.
Right.
So geographically you have that, but this came from our Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, our single state agency, that they wanted a single point of contact, that they could trust, and then develop like recovery community centers, services all across the state. So they only had to deal with that one entity, and that one if something happened in one of the sites, we would take care of it. And now the state created, they have to deal with 14, right? More or less in Minnesota, but that happens in a lot of places too. So, but this is kind of getting into our business and nonprofit management thing. So, I was fascinated too. One of the things I remember about you coming out and implementing was, I think telephone recovery support was still really new to us. And telephone recovery support is where we call somebody and check in on their recovery, right? Just a little different spin. And still today, we've been doing it maybe 15, 16 years. We're still calling 500 people a week here in
It's
Connecticut.
amazing.
And is that still going in Minnesota? Do you know?
It is.
Isn't that
Yeah.
cool?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It's such I just love that model
Mm-hmm.
of, you know, the of having someone who a peer, someone who has something to offer, to call someone who may be struggling, to
Mm-hmm.
say, this expectation that someone who is struggling with substances is going to pick up the phone and check in,
Yeah.
is kind of absurd. It
Mm-hmm.
just doesn't happen that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just really a great model.
Well, I've recently been struggling a little bit with, I'm not struggling, I just accepting, but I've had a lot of, with losing both my parents back in March. They were divorced for 40 years and they passed within 48 hours of each other. And
Wow.
I was at the bedside of both of them, basically. And, one of my buddies, we were all at breakfast. We have a breakfast club from the class of 77. And he says, well, you could have called me. And I said, when I'm feeling this way, the last thing I want to do is call somebody. And that's true, like 33, 34 years in recovery. I don't want to talk to anybody about it. But if you
Yeah.
called me and asked me about it, asked me a good question, I might open up about it. But my tendency is when I'm feeling a certain way is just to shut down, retreat.
Yeah.
It's not to reach out, but we think that's what we're supposed to do. So call me before you fall. No, I'm not going to do that. But anyway.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yep.
Talk to us a little bit about what brought you from that season of 5 years to what you're doing today.
So when I left Minnesota Recovery Connection in 2014.
And you left a very viable, strong organization with a strong foundation. So kudos to you for doing
Yeah.
that, because that's what I
Yeah.
want to do when I ultimately let go of CCAR. I want it to be so solid and so strong that it just
Nobody notices
continues.
that the banana shirts
Right.
have
Yeah, the
left the
banana
building.
shirt left.
Yes. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that, MRC did have a couple of rough years
Of course.
after I left. Not,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just by the very nature of transition, and
Mm-hmm.
there was some turnover on the board. They moved locations, but I was burned out. I mean, I was actually still in graduate school while I was working at MRC. It took me 5 years to get that business degree because I was essentially applying my master's in nonprofit management in real time. Like I would go to class and
Oh yeah.
I remember taking like the nonprofit finance class or law class or something. And I mean, I was so green. I didn't know anything. I remember one night in class learning about 990s and I was like, oh my God. Like, what's a 990? Do we have that? And so then I would go to work the next day and, try to figure it out. But so I had gone through a divorce in 2006. I had a young child, my son, who is now 17. He was just a little guy. I was, building a recovery community organization, and I was in graduate school. And I just, after 5 years, I thought I need something a little less demanding. So I left MRC and I went to Hazelden, which is now the Hazel and Betty Ford Foundation. And I did take I hate to say it this way, but it was an easier job. I mean, I would start work I would sit down at my desk at 8 a.m. and at 4:30, the parking lot of that place would just empty. I mean, it was a treatment center. I was not working on the clinical side of things. I was still in the realm of recovery management. So my passion really is around helping people find and sustain recovery in real life, not in necessarily while they're in a detox center or a treatment center. So I got to do that. But that job was never really quite right for me because it was in Center City, Minnesota, which is 45 minutes to an hour away from St. Paul, Minneapolis, where I live. And I always felt like every morning I would like get in my car and drive away from the community that I lived in and recovered in to this clinical setting. And, no shade on the treatment world, but it just wasn't quite right for me. But I stayed there. I moved into another job, kind of a bigger job as the executive director of alumni services. And I did that for a few years. I was at Hazelden for about 5 years, a little less than 5 years. And it was okay. I mean, it was, I had great colleagues and it was kind of exciting, working for a big organization like that. But there was an organization based out of Denver, Colorado called the Phoenix, which they're they don't even call themselves an RCO, but really they are a recovery community organization in the sense that they're a nonprofit organization that's run and led by members of the local recovery community, and they exist to serve that community. When I was there, everything they did revolved around physical activity. So now they're kind of branching out into other things like art and music and other activities. But I had an opportunity to go to the Phoenix, and that organization has a mission that is just, it's infused in every bone in my body. A big part of my recovery story is that I have always used running and yoga and fitness as part of my recovery. And in the beginning, going back to that story of how I was sort of in and out of AA when I was in my 20s, and then I got the DUI, and I still was trying. Right in there, I joined a running club, and I could not run. I was a smoker, like a pack-a-day smoker. I couldn't run a block without. I mean, I just was like, oh my God, like this is impossible. But I started running, and someone told me about this running group on Saturday mornings. It wasn't a recovery group or sober folks or anything, but I just started showing up at this running club, and it changed my life. I mean, I think that it helped diffuse my anxiety and stress, and maybe it got some feel-good chemicals going in my brain, who knows? But I think that for me, it was those two things together that was the winning recipe that helped me get into recovery and stay in recovery. And that was 25 years ago. I still run. I just ran the New York City Marathon in November.
Wow.
I, along the way, I've done it. This kind of goes along the lines of my love of learning also. Like if I'm interested in something, I just want to learn everything about it. So I started doing yoga, and I was like, this is amazing. I want to know everything about yoga. So I went through a teacher training, like this immersion teacher training program back in 2006. And I started teaching yoga. I kept running, for years and years. I just would run every day after work, 3 miles, 5 miles. I ran marathons. I went through various strength training certifications, Strong First kettlebell certifications. And I got my personal training cert in 2020. I was certified as a CrossFit instructor. Again, I was doing CrossFit, but I wanted to know more. Like, how do you break down these movements? And how did the CrossFit people develop this curriculum, so to speak? So I just am always so hungry for learning about different things. I left the Phoenix in February of 2020 to start my own business. Hurley Health. It's something that I've always wanted to do is, have my own thing. And the idea was to combine fitness with recovery coaching. My last day of work at the Phoenix was February 4th, and the pandemic hit March 8th. My first year doing Hurley Health didn't go according to plan, but nothing ever does, so that's all right. But I've been doing it for a couple of years now. I have a little workout studio in the basement of my home. And the original idea of Hurley Health was to work one-on-one with people who are either like coming out of treatment or, maybe not going to treatment, but new in recovery, and to combine fitness or infuse fitness as part of the recovery process, not the whole recovery process. Fitness is not a recovery program, but it can be, for me, it helped. I just know it in my gut that helped me so much. And also working in various settings, seeing there is a gap, like, fitness is not a part of many recovery programs, and it has such an impact on a person's mental well-being. And, I think that it can help sustain a person's recovery. It can keep them from relapse if abstinence is the goal. So, I do just that. I work one-on-one with people who are new in recovery. Some of my clients are people who have been in recovery for quite a long time. Right now, I work with one woman who's been in recovery for 8 years, and she's wanting to do some. I also have a precision nutrition certification. So she's wanting to kind of feel better in terms of her physical health and get in shape, and I love it. It's really rewarding work. But here's the surprising thing for me is that I thought that this was the population that I was going to focus on, but I did a dry January group. Everyone in this group was not, in my non-clinical, unprofessional opinion, not alcoholics. These are people who felt like they were drinking, their drinking had increased during the pandemic. They felt like they were drinking more than was healthy. These were fairly health conscious people who wanted to take a break from alcohol for a month. And so I supported them, the whole group supported each other in that process. And it was so cool. They love, for people who are in that kind of gray area, to have permission to be curious about sobriety or recovery, or take a look at their substance use, to take a break from it, maybe to reduce it. Like back in the day when I got into recovery, you were either an alcoholic or not. It was very black and white. And there's a whole world of gray out there. And I love the sober curious movement and the idea that you do not have to be an alcoholic to live a sober lifestyle.
Right.
You can do it for health reasons. You can do it because you feel better, without any chemicals in your body. So I do support people now who are what I call gray area drinkers. These are people who would not be clinically appropriate to go to detox or treatment. They will never go to AA. They don't want to call themselves alcoholics. They're not going to swear off alcohol forever. It's just that doesn't fit, but they're looking for, something.
Yeah.
And working with that population has been really, really fun for me.
I love it, because even for those who don't meet those clinical definitions, there are moments, events, activities where alcohol has done harm to them or those around them.
Right.
And so.
And I also love what you're saying about fitness, because we have a son that's in recovery. He says he's in recovery. He's only 19 years old. And he is now turning into this CrossFit, like, wow, he's totally into it. And it's really
Yeah.
cool to see him doing that and setting personal bests and all that kind of stuff. And he's studying exercise science, so he's also very interested in the correct movement and technique and all that kind of stuff too.
Yeah.
I would love for
It's
you to talk to him actually.
I would
Uh,
love to talk to him because one of the most interesting things I've done this past year is I went through a training. It's called trauma informed weightlifting, and it's through the trauma center at JRI, Justice Reform Institute, maybe out of Boston. And uh, it it was just incredible. I
mm-hmm,
mean, I've learned a lot about trauma over
mm-hmm,
the last, whatever time period thing, as a non-clinical person, I don't really hone in on that kind of stuff, but um, trauma is so common, and you can heal trauma through somatic experiences, through movement
Mm-hmm.
and yoga
mm-hmm,
or weightlifting. Yoga doesn't work for everyone. There are people who go into the gym. The gym that I go to is a a bodybuilding gym. I'm not a bodybuilder, but it's a bodybuilding gym, and there are people there. It's very uh, there are a lot of members, a lot of people in this gym, and a lot of sort of like one percenters, people who bodybuilders are like the 1% of the fitness world. And you look around, and I just have a sense that a lot of people in that gym have experienced trauma. And what is driving them to the gym to lift heavy weight and to feel powerful is something that has happened in their life, in their past, where they felt like they didn't have any power. And learning about it's kind of like DE&I stuff. It's like just becoming aware. Like just the awareness is something. It's progress.
mm,
I used to go into a gym and I never gave one single thought to the music that was being played, it's kind of like an RCO, like how is it set up? How do people greet you? What are people wearing? What's the culture of the gym? So anyway, I'm off on a tangent, but if your son has any interest in that, I'd love to talk
He's
to
in
him.
Chicago.
well, he's
He
in
might dig it.
Chicago, but it sounds like you're going to open your own gym.
Well, maybe someday. We'll see.
It's set up the way you like it, and all this is a
Yeah.
trauma-informed gym,
Yep.
like, yep.
Yep.
As we come to the end of our time together, what are you looking forward to?
Doing more of this work.
Mm.
I feel like I've only been doing Hurley Health for about a year and a half, and it still feels very new. I still, it's hard having your own business. You have to do it all the marketing, all the, communications, all the programming, everything. But it's really exciting, and I am looking forward to just sort of watching it unfold as I'm in the work. I feel like I'm in the right place.
Mm.
Thank you, Nell. I've enjoyed this conversation. I know you better now because of it. I appreciate you sharing everything you did. So I wish you nothing but success and would love to come see you sometime and maybe become one of your clients. Because
Yes.
I need to I'm trying to become a little more healthy all on my own. Lots of
Well, I
walk.
would like to do what you did, which is walk. I don't think I would ever be able to do the whole trail, but even just a little section of it would be a dream come
Yeah,
true for me.
yeah.
So you come here, I'll go there, and
Yeah, we'll be
we'll,
happy to support you. You do that walk. We'll catch up with you and bring you ice cold Coca-Colas. And
No more sugar. Has to be Diet Coke.
I'm not talking
uh,
about you. I'm
Oh,
talking
well,
about.
she might be right.
All right.
All right. Well,
thank
thanks,
you
Nell.
both.
All
All
This
right.
right.
was great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye.